everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of our Neurodiverse World. If you have not already hit the like and subscribe button, well, I don't know what you're waiting for, so just go ahead and do that right now. Wait. Okay, cool. And this week with us, and I totally forgot to ask her how she says her name, so I hope I don't butcher it right now. But I have with us today Judy Lane Boyer. Did I get it right?
Yes, you did. Hello, and thank you for having me on.
Hello. So how are you today?
Doing well, doing really well. Yeah, trying to make it through this heat, but hopefully not too much longer.
Camera keeps going out, guys. I don't know what to tell you. Can you see that it's going out? Like, I can see that it goes out.
I just hear like gaps sometimes in the audio.
Yeah, my internet's doing weird things this week. I don't know. Let's blame the heat. Yes, let's blame the heat. So tell us a little bit about who you are.
Okay. My name is Judy Lane Boyer. I am the owner and operator of Audience Granted Ghostwriters. I also provide other writing services like writing coaching and high level edits like developmental line editing, manuscript assessments, that sort of thing. This work is a culmination of just so many things that I have loved and been interested in. And as part of my journey, which I'm sure we'll get to today, a lot of what I do now is things that I always dreamed of, but never thought were actually possible for me. So yeah, I don't know what else.
Why?
In Austin.
No, this is a good way. Why didn't you believe it would happen for you?
Why did I not? That's a long story, and it partly has to do with ADHD, but much more than that has to do with my background and how I was raised, which is I was raised in a very traditional conservative church that took a very conservative, narrow view of what women can and should do. College degrees, post-secondary education, and pursuing careers were something that were generally frowned on for women. So that's a big part of it. Growing up in that environment with ADHD, I will say was a challenge because I definitely, in many ways, did not fit the meek and mild mold or model of what a Christian woman was idealized as.
Yes. And just before we go any further, I always like to read our definition of whatever we're talking about. So ADHD, this is from WebMD. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's a brain disorder that affects how you pay attention, sit still, and control your behavior. That's just, the clinical definition. But I definitely am right there with you on that one. But let's start in the younger years. What kind of made you feel different?
Okay. I did miss quite a chunk of what you said. But I did.
Oh, darn internet. I think you understand though.
Yes. No. So how did I feel starting younger? So I'm going to do what I always used to do. And of course, I'm sure you know what masking is. As I've gotten older, I've learned to mask this. But this is what I would do all the time when I was a kid. When I was just so overcome by emotion, I'd do like this, And when you're little, that's okay. But the older you get, like that's weird. So I learned to mask that. But I would do things like when I was really excited, I'd start dancing around. And by the time I was 9, 10, 11, I started getting the stink eye or the weird eye from, other girls my age. Like, well, okay, what are you doing? I was just anything I felt, whether I was sad or happy or excited or scared, whatever I felt very intensely, and I would react that way. And even I'm sorry to say, even my family, who I feel like, my dad was diagnosed back in the day when he was a child as hyperactive, which is what they called it back then. Yes. And my mom kind of had that understanding too. She always, even though I was never formally diagnosed, she felt that it applied to me as well. But even though they had somewhat of an understanding, I still would get reprimanded, scolded, punished sometimes for, or just, basically you shouldn't feel that way. Like, I just feel so sad, like I want to die. And, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Which, I think they did the best they could, but yeah, I was interested in things that, I like to play. I was a girl, but I like to play football. I like to play cowboys and Indians and, ninja, whatever, outside, and Star Wars, which is definitely like, I don't think I had a Barbie doll till I was like 10 or 11. And then I really didn't even play with a Barbie doll. I was always, except for to make them like the kidnappers, played with our other animals and toys and stuff. I love G.I. Joe. And it was not it was just, I was more interested in active things and things that were moving more and, not just sitting around quietly being still. I did love to read, which I realized for people who have ADHD, that is a little bit of an anomaly, but I didn't stay still. And that was one thing I was always getting scolded for a lot was as I would read, I would sit, I'd start off normal. And then the next thing, but I'd hold the book and keep reading the whole time, but I'd twist around. I'd be upside down in the chair. I'd be halfway on the floor, half in the chair, all the way in the floor, flipped over. Like I would just like almost roll across the room as I read. But yeah,
I like that. I think that's fabulous that you kept the book going. Have you been diagnosed now as an adult?
Yes, I have. So one of the things that happened when I started getting out of my former church, I started going to therapy right away, and that helped immensely. And I will never not be in therapy. Probably I go once a month, and it helps a ton. But she did a diagnostic on me, which I mentioned that, I was not really encouraged at all. I was actually discouraged from going to school, from going to college. So I started going to college. And so the diagnosis that my therapist gave me was enough to get me accommodations, which were hugely helpful, especially when I transferred from the community college to a regular university, 4-year university.
Okay. What kind of accommodations?
So, they gave me time and a half on tests, because a lot of times it's, your thoughts go all over, and just trying to organize them and pull them in and get it organized so that you can write. So they would also, obviously, when you're a college student, attendance is kind of a like take it or leave it thing. Some professors might, it might affect your grade to some extent, but they can't. It's not like when you're in public school, when it's not the same authority level. A professor doesn't have that like a teacher does over a third grader. So they can't keep me from leaving, but the disability office or whatever, they would give me a letter that I would give to each of my professors, telling them that sometimes I just needed to get up and walk out of the class for a few minutes and like walk around, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, that was another thing back at my old church when I was younger. I would get, people would come talk to my parents when I got old enough to sit as a young person by myself or a young adult. I couldn't sit through a whole sermon. So I'd get up and leave. I go to the bathroom. I'd stand at the back and, kind of walk around a little bit.
Yeah.
And I got different times people would come talk to my dad and like, your daughter gets up a lot during church service.
It's a long thing. Church service is long.
It really is. I don't know how everybody manages to sit through the whole
I
thing.
doodle.
Yeah, no, yeah, I do. I'm playing on Facebook. And I can hear, and that's one of the great things about ADHD is that you can toggle your attention back and forth really quickly, so you pretty much can keep on top of a lot of things. But yeah, so that was another accommodation. I'm trying to remember some of the other accommodations that they gave me. Um, but then, anyway, to follow up with that, at one point, halfway through when I was at the university, I was to the point, it was just before COVID hit. I was to the point where I was just not dealing with, the other big accommodation. Yes, now I remember, was that for people with ADHD, 6 hours is considered full time.
Oh, that is a big deal.
That is huge because I admire and I think it's wonderful people that are working a full-time job and they're doing full-time school and they're juggling that and their families. If you can do it, that's great. That's not me. I was dying with just, 9 or 12 hours. And anyway, but what that allowed me, it allowed me to apply for scholarships that were open only to full-time students or other opportunities that were open only to full-time students. I did usually take 9 hours, but the one semester I started taking 12 hours. I was so overwhelmed. I ended up going to a psychiatrist, and that's when I got like the medical diagnosis, which allowed me to get medication.
Okay. And my internet, I hate it today. I don't know why. Anyways, did you find the medication helpful?
It was, it got me through it got me through about the last 8 or 9 months because I did an honors track. So that required doing research and writing a thesis. And it got me through that. Once I got to the end of that, though, I ditched the medicine well, I didn't ditch it, but we played with the dosage and because, it has side effects that by that time I'm in my 40s and I feel like I've been dealing with ADHD a long time and I prefer the devil I know to the devil I don't know. So I prefer to deal with the ADHD symptoms without medication rather than dealing with the side effects of the ADHD medication. But it's because, if things in my life were to ramp back up and get as intense as they were, I would probably want to go back on medication.
Yeah. And I like that you say that because medication in and of itself is not a bad thing. It works for some, it doesn't work for others. It works for certain situations, but you might not need it all the time. And so I like how you made a point of saying, if things got all ramped up and all over again, like when you were in you. And so just knowing when is a good time to have it and when is a okay time to not have it is so important and so insightful. But just know, always talk to your doctor.
Right. No, yes. No, absolutely. Yeah. But I will say, well, I don't know how relevant this is. It did make me understand, in the past I have friends who have relatives who are bipolar or have other other neurodivergent syndromes or conditions. And I've always wondered, like, why don't you just take your medication? Why is it so hard for you just to not, but now I get it. I get it. Like, one of the side effects of one of the meds I was taking was just like, at the end of the day, I was ready to bite my poor husband's head off for no reason.
Oh.
So it was like, as the medication wore off, I just get super irritable. And I did not like that.
Yeah. I remember my kid, before he was diagnosed with autism, they diagnosed him with ADHD and he tried some. And that's how it was. Just you'd be like, oh, hey. And he'd be like, I'm like, okay. So I totally understand what side effects you're talking about there because I have witnessed. Where did my kid go?
Yeah,
Right? So, but obviously, through all the ups, the downs, the loop-de-loops, you've managed to create this wonderful business.
mhm. Yeah. No, I am so grateful. I told you I liked reading books when I was a kid. My grandmother, her business was old and rare books. So
Oh,
her house
cool.
was practically a library. Because the church we were in, they didn't, they preached against television and movies. So, you know, I love stories and my family loves stories. And so we would my parents read to me. I learned to read really early. And it wasn't long before I was writing my own stories and creating my own stories. And like many people I run to who are neurodivergent, I loved all the sci-fi and the fantasy and the fairy tales and mythology. Um, and so I would write, but I just never thought that I could do something like this. And I am going to tell you, being a business owner is hard. It's hard on anybody. Um, but I view my ADHD, it presents some challenges with that, but it also, I feel in a lot of ways, um, gives me some advantages. Um,
Okay. Like,
well, you're able to, as you know, part of it, and I try not to think of ADHD as a disorder, but rather as a difference. Um, and so one of the things that people with ADHD are famous for is very short and fluctuating attention span. But the other side of that, the flip side of that, is that you can have what is called hyperfocus. So when you are interested in something, um, in fact, one of my healthcare providers said there is a movement towards renaming ADHD an interest-based nervous system. When you're not interested in something, it is super hard to pay attention, and super hard to do stuff that bores you. But when you're interested in it, it's like you can't stop.
you forget to eat, you forget to pee. Like, it's one
Yeah,
thing is happening. Yeah.
right. So I feel like and the fact that on the flip side, when you are bored with a task, if you're a business owner, there is never not something to do. Um, so it's never like, well, I'm bored with working on this and but I have nothing to do. There's always something else that you can shift your attention to. Um,
Yes.
so that's one of the upsides. But yeah, writing, I love to help people, which I don't know if you've discussed this on your show, but in one of my recent blog posts, I was writing about how if you are neurodivergent, that can help you become a much more empathetic and intuitive person. Um, as I'm sure you're aware, people with ADHD, by the time they're, I think, age 13, they've received something like 8 times the amount of negative feedback.
I hadn't heard it, but I believe it.
Yes. And so I feel like what that's done for me is that I'm much more willing to give people second chances. I'm much more willing to give, um, to try to understand where someone's coming from, rather than just write them off. And so those are I love to help people. And I love those topics. So right now, I mean, I'm a ghostwriter and writing coach for people who are writing about topics that are mental health related, neurodivergence related, relationship related. And I feel like it's just like my life has really come together, which is
I love it.
so exciting. Yes.
That is exciting. And so tell us the name of your business.
Audience granted ghostwriters.
And how did you come up with that?
Oh gosh, I agonized and agonized and agonized over the name. I wanted it to be perfect. I've got a bit
It
of a
is.
thank you. I've got a bit of a perfectionist streak in me, but I went with audience granted because the idea is it's a little bit of an older concept, but as people are writing, whether they're writing blogs, whether they're writing a book or even a script for a podcast, what they're wanting is they're wanting an audience. And so the idea is I'm granting you the audience. But I like the old, like the fairy tales and the medieval tales, where the king, you seek an audience from the king or whatever, and audience is granted. So that's
Oh, I like that. That's very unique.
thank you. So I'm not sure that lots of people get it, but yeah, that's kind of how I did it.
Awesome. So is there any tips that you would give to somebody who has been struggling with maybe they're not diagnosed or maybe they are, but just kind of struggling and thinking, maybe I have ADHD?
Definitely, I would say get a professional diagnosis, but be very careful. The first psychiatrist I went, fortunately, like I said, I'd been to two therapists who were on board with the fact that I had ADHD. But the first psychiatrist I went to see when I decided I needed some medication to get me through college, he talked to me for like 20 minutes. And then he tried to tell me I was bipolar. And I ended up standing up and walking out on him. And I'm like, I'm not dealing with this because I have been on ADHD forums and I knew that a lot of people with ADHD, especially women, especially adult women who are, not in their 20s, a lot of practitioners are very reluctant to diagnose them because the ADHD medication is on the highly restricted list. So a lot of practitioners don't want to diagnose you, but I would say do your homework. Make sure that you're very comfortable with the person who, you're relying on to diagnose you, and make sure they take their time with you. I mean, this guy tried to tell me, he talked to me barely 20 minutes. He asked me some questions and he didn't go in depth on the questions. So that's what I would say. Just make sure your practitioner is very, really getting to know you and your situation and not just checking off a bunch of boxes and then throwing you a diagnosis quickly.
Yeah, that is such a good point. You have to advocate for yourself.
Yes. And I mean, I would say too, in business, I recently had somebody where one of my clients that I work with, they kept wanting me to do my calendar a certain way. And I kept telling them, like, that doesn't work for me. And part of the reason is because I'm a business owner and not just, like, this isn't a side gig. This is part of my business.
Yeah.
And part of it was because of my ADHD, and so I tried to tell them that, and I worked with the owner of that company, client company, and we came up with a solution. Well, several months down the road, just recently, one of the people at the company reached out to me again and tried to get me to do the thing with the calendar that she originally wanted me to do that we'd worked through and found out was not viable.
Yeah.
And she said, and it was one of those things where she said, I know you don't want to do this, or this is not your thing, but it would just help us so much if you could. And I wrote her back, and I tried to be nice, but I said, this is not a personal preference. This is a medically diagnosed disability that I have that you guys have agreed to accommodate.
Mhm.
So I think it's important, it helps to have that diagnosis. You
Yeah.
never want to use whatever you have as a crutch or an excuse. But at the same time, because things like autism and ADHD and bipolarism they're invisible disabilities, unless
Yes.
you sit and talk to us, you're not going to know. We look normal.
Mhm.
And then why did I get so mad? Or why did you forget your keys? Again,
Yeah.
sometimes you need to remind people this is a disability. This is not a moral failure. This is not me just trying to make your life harder. So yeah, I think that's important too.
I love how you say that we can't use it as a crutch, because I tell and so he'll do whatever and I'll be like, "Kate, we've talked about this. Like, you have to, I don't know, put your dishes in the sink, not on the counter. Something simple." "Oh, it's just my autism brain." I'm like, no, we are not using this as an excuse. This is something that, yeah, okay, maybe you have to work on it a little bit harder than somebody else, but we're not using this as an excuse. No, no, no. Get back over here and do what you were asked to do. Because I think, especially for kids, right, the younger ones, it's easy to just write these things off as, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's what they do at the school board level. They'll be like, oh, you have this diagnosis. Okay, you don't have to do this assignment, which is good at times. However, our experience has been that they kept giving my son, my kid, work that was so much easier than what his ability was, simply because they didn't want to have to deal with a potential outburst if he got frustrated with the math question.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
not helpful, right? It's
Right.
really not helpful. There has to be a balance, and I get that.
Yeah.
And he was in grade 7 or 8 at the time, and I'm like, no, he's far beyond this. This is ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. Having one of these syndromes doesn't mean that you're less intelligent. In fact, and that happened to me a few times with the Office of Disability at the university, where I would like, can I have a later deadline on this because I'm feeling overwhelmed? And they would tell me, no, sorry, because, the semester is only so long. And if you keep letting all your deadlines go longer, then you're going to end up overwhelmed at the end of the semester rather than right now. And, as has been pointed out, I've heard it pointed out, you can't tell the IRS, sorry, forgot that check. Sorry, forgot to file my taxes.
Right?
You have to, it's finding that balance between giving yourself and helping other people give you grace. But at the same time, finding ways to make life work for you.
Yeah. You said it perfectly. Like, absolutely perfectly. And now that you say that, that's the example that happens all the time with my kid, is that right? Like, I don't care that you just woke up. We have to go and do this. It's already scheduled, right? We can't miss it. And, oh, well, it's not my fault that my autism makes me have random sleep patterns and this and that. Like, and I do get it that there has been studies that there is sleep issues related to it. However, he's going to be 17 this year. He wants to go to college next year. He wants to get a part-time job. Well, you can't tell your boss, oh, my autism made me too sleepy at the wrong time, and now I can't make it for my shift.
Right. No, you have to figure out tricks. And then at the end of the day, you may find that there are just certain things that just, they're not for you.
Right? Exactly. You might, like, I can't see him ever doing, say, a 9 to 5 job. Like, which is fine. He'll probably end up wanting something that's like a midnight shift, because that's when he is more awake. Our school system doesn't do that. But when it comes to the workforce, you can find something that fits you instead of you fitting it.
No, I found out pretty early on that being a receptionist or any kind of like administrative anything is not for me, um, because it requires you can't be forgetful. You know, you can't accidentally file stuff in the wrong spot if you're working for a medical clinic. You know, that's just not going to go over. And then what would happen is I would get so overwhelmed because I couldn't complete one task before getting 50 more as people were coming in, that I'd start being rude to people. And so, you know, I realized this is not for me. I need to find something else that I can actually handle.
Right. And that goes for people even that are neurotypical, right? They're not
Right.
going to be good or want to do every type of job out there. So it's the same thing. It's finding what is best for you, what you enjoy doing, and what
Mhm.
suits your abilities and skills best.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right. And or starting something like you did, like start your own business and you'll find what works eventually.
Right. And I would say also like on the whole starting your own business thing, I think one thing that is very important to me, and another tip is, you know, nobody's I think the world is becoming increasingly aware that we are not made to do life alone. I think the pandemic really showed us that. But especially for not neurodivergent people, you really need to find your people. Um,
Yes.
who can understand you, be patient with you, but also call you out when you need to be called out, and but be supportive. I mean, starting my own business has been very rough in a lot of ways. But I mean, one thing I knew I needed pretty early on, and my husband and I worked towards it, and we did it, is we got me a business coach. Um, and you know, now my business is to the point where I'm looking at delegating. What can I delegate? Because and I think that's not something that just neurodivergent business owners or any business owners should do. That's something that any neurodivergent should do with any aspect of your life. You don't want to use other people as your crutch either, or as your servant, but you know, you do need a support system.
Okay. Okay, so my internet is going all wonky. I heard that one of the best things that you did was get a
Hello.
there. Can you so I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm
Sorry.
hotspotting off my phone now. I gave up on my home internet. I'm hotspotting off my phone. So,
Okay.
so the last thing I heard you say was that one of the best things that you did was get a business coach.
Yes. Yes. And I was just saying that I think that's a good thing to do for, you know, if you're neurodivergent in any way, you need some sort of support system. Nobody, you know, everybody needs a support system, but I think it's especially true with people who are neurodivergent. Um, you know, finding your people who will be patient with you, who will understand where you're coming from, um, who are comfortable around you and you're comfortable around, but you know, who will also be there, you know, in my house. I love it. There's certain things I'm very good at, like cooking big crazy meals with all kinds of ingredients all over the kitchen, um, that my husband is not. He's very simple. He like, you know, cooks steak and, you know, steams vegetables, but But one thing, I have never taken my vitamins so faithfully in my life as since I got married. My husband, he's one of these super organized people, and every night he gets our vitamins ready for the next day, and first thing in the morning he puts out my vitamins and he puts out his vitamins. I used to take vitamins like 3 times a year. Now I take them every day. So but again, there's things I do well that he's not as good at. And so I think it's just finding your people that can help you with stuff like that. Yeah. Oops. Sorry. Okay, now I can see you, but I cannot hear you. Let's see. Let's do chat. Can you hear me? Okay, I can't hear you, but maybe if you shoot me the question in the chat, if you can hear me, maybe I can at least answer it. Okay, so my Facebook page is on the screen, my website also. You can find me on Facebook as Judy Lane Boyer, on Instagram as oddgrant1, and Judy Lane Boyer on LinkedIn. And I think my business name, Audience Granted Ghostwriters, is on Alignable too, for those of you who may be small business owners on Alignable. So
As always, thank you so much for the amazing guests that we have on the show. Be sure to check out their links down in the description below. If you want to support the channel, go ahead and check out our merch store. We've got some very cool things on there. That's my favorite. Sorry, I'm busy ending the stigma. But there's some other very cool designs. 10% of the proceeds always goes back to the Canadian Mental Health Association. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at RB Media, because we have some great new shows coming up and you never want to miss any of those episodes. And remember, the only way to end the stigma of mental health is to speak openly and honestly. Bye.